Oftentimes I was the designer that was translating the developers for the designers.
We have to dive a little bit deeper.
It unlocked something in me that I got really excited by that.
After your tenure, your 2 years there, what happened after?
My dream project showed up. This project that I was like, oh my God, I had described a project similar in my head.
Because it seems like it's interwoven into the fabric of practice.
It was actually like a moment, like a bell ringing off.
Michelle, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited about this because this is a recommendation from a mutual friend, acquaintance, Michael from This Is Pattern. And so I'm glad that we could make the time to make this work. And I know that we're going to get into a bunch of amazing topics, from brand building to how it differentiates from brand identity, to sustainability, to ethical commerce, graphic novels even, which is maybe the thing that I want to talk about the most. But without further ado, I would love it if you could give us a quick Wikipedia summary of who you are and what you do with practice.
Amazing. I'm so glad to be here. I am Michelle Mattar. I run Practice, which is a brand building firm. We work globally, but we're based in New York, and we partner on end-to-end brand launches. So from 0 to 100, or relaunching products to market. We're a small team, and as a person working at Practice, I am a lot of things. I'm a designer, I'm a strategist, I operate and run a business, I'm a writer, an idea person. And before, building this brand building firm, I was an independent doing similar work for 6 years, learning right behind founders, and really love the intersection of business, design, and strategy to help realize something that's bigger than any one person.
I'm curious about a million different things. I'm curious about how you got into sustainability. I'm curious about how you got into design. But most of all, I'm super curious about the graphic novel that you're writing currently, and what prompted you to want to write a graphic novel in the first place. Two, how is that going for you? And 3, are you willing to share about what that is in general, and maybe potentially when that'll come out?
Yeah, absolutely. It might take a while. It's taken a while so far. Something people don't tell you before you start writing a graphic novel is when you want to change the story, you also have to change the drawings. And when you want to change the drawings, you sometimes have to change the story. So it's cyclical. But I've been working on it now for a few years. And interestingly, I think what made me want to start writing one was, I have 2 skill sets as a brand builder that I rely on probably the most. And that's my visual eye, and then writing, and my brain thinking about ideas. And it was really hard to think of a personal project that would really keep me going on, inspired on both fronts. When it's purely visual, I prefer when it's shorter, more of a sprint. When it's purely writing, it can feel a little bit more daunting at times. And something about a graphic novel really spoke to me, that it was like, oh, I can keep it moving in both areas and have fun with it, which was, it always should be part of the point.
Was there a period of your life when you got into graphic novels? I'm assuming that you didn't just like one day wake up and you're like, I should write a graphic novel. You probably had some exposure, whether in your childhood or adulthood.
Yeah, I went to art school, so I definitely just was exposed to a lot of different types of art there. But beforehand, I had a high school English teacher that assigned reading the Joker in class, which was really unusual. I believe Brian Azzarello was one of the artists on that. And it's really well written. And I just never really understood how a graphic novel could be such a page turner like that, or really kind of dial up your imagination. I always felt like I had enough of an imagination for novels, but it unlocked something in me that I got really excited by that. And then going to art school just unleashed a whole new subculture of subcultures.
And where did you go to art school?
I went to Pratt in Brooklyn.
For what specifically? Because that might be impactful later.
Yeah, I studied graphic design.
Okay, so it's traditional graphic design. And roughly, I mean, you don't have to say roughly what year was this?
No, I can say I went from 2009 to 2013.
When I was in school around like the same time, all of my teachers were very like Swiss designers, like super into like clean grids and like beautiful typography, could care less about like the web in general and just wanted to, like, to teach us straight fundamentals and typography. What was your kind of class structure like?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because the reason I got into graphic design was making websites. And I got to university and was like, oh, wait, the curriculum is so behind. But definitely it was very traditional. The first year was all foundational art, which I ended up really loving. And then through the courses, it probably was more print adjacent than it was digitally adjacent. I do feel like it was at a time where the curriculum couldn't be quite caught up because everything was still catching. But I remember I had like a typography 1 class where we used to have to like walk up to the board and draw Garamond lowercase b from memory, or like pretty old school.
I don't think I could do that. I don't even think I could picture Garamond type in my head.
They made us memorize like Garamond as the serif and Helvetica as the sans serif to help us learn how the two worked. And we had to trace them over and over and over until we memorized it, and then eventually write it on board on call, which was, yeah, pretty, to me, it's like, when I replay it in my mind, it looks like an art school movie more than my own. Yeah.
Kind of taking a trip in the time machine, in the DeLorean, if you will. When was the first moment that you realized that you were creative and wanted to do design as a career? I think we all have interesting origin stories, and I like to try and pry it out because I think it gives a lot of insights into the type of businesses that we're either a part of or building ourselves today.
I definitely identified as creative from an early age. My parents, there's a whole story before this, but my parents owned a candy factory growing up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, near Newark. And I spent a lot of time there because, childcare was an extra thing on top of that, and they were both working there together. So I was just, in a warehouse trying to decide how to entertain myself a lot of the times. And I think sometimes when you're put in a box, you become pretty creative. So I would make sculptures, I would draw all day. I found certain things, and you can only like ride your scooter back and forth in there so much. And there weren't other kids, so it was it was a little bit of an expression of creativity there, but it kept going.
What type of candy were your parents creating?
They were creating mostly like holiday centric gift things. So they sold to places like CVS. It was small, but it was the American dream. My dad had worked in business in the Middle East and just didn't like what he was doing, and moved us to the US and opened a candy company with no prior experience.
the Middle Eastern Willy Wonka, if you will.
Yes, yeah. And I really think the true American entrepreneurial dream, like I can go to America and make it happen kind of mentality.
I mean, that's beautiful. Did that translate into you feeling the confidence in order to start your own design practice, or did that kind of come secondary or maybe through osmosis?
Oh, I don't know so much that it did, to be totally honest. And I know my mom would be okay with me saying this is never super successful. So it wasn't like I had this benchmark, like that was going to open up opportunities more so than, let's say, like a full-time job. But I will say there were a lot of things about my childhood that made me very comfortable with risk taking, and that I definitely owe to some like pretty big life experiences early on. I don't think that I necessarily needed to learn them as an adult because I had such hard but good lessons as a kid.
Beautiful. I know that you had sent over kind of how you got into design, and I think it's a fascinating story. But before we go there, you grew up in this kind of interesting way where you're in the candy factory with your parents, helping them, drawing, being creative. And so that as a foundation, you went to Pratt and then ultimately joined the workforce. But how did your parents feel about you taking this path into the arts and design? Was that something that they encouraged you to do? Were they like your biggest cheerleader in that?
I would say it's not necessarily the most esteemed profession coming from like a Middle Eastern culture. So it did take some convincing. My father passed away when I was 11. So mostly I had to convince my mom. And I had such fierce passion and drive as a teenager. I was like, I think my first web design client, I had at like 14 or 15, and I made a woman a site for her hometown stage and business. So I did have some pretty good convincing under my belt, but it did take a little bit of extra effort to say like, no, this is a career that I want to do, not just a hobby. And I think a lot of us can relate to that, of just needing people to take it seriously before maybe they're ready.
So did you teach yourself how to code?
This is a little bit of what I was saying earlier of a slightly unusual childhood, but in this process where I was growing up in this candy factory, but also my father became sick with cancer, and unrelated, just unlucky, my brother also was. So there was just a lot of kind of time, you know, we couldn't travel when two people are ill like that. My mom had to take care of them. So I think I put pen to paper, and I also went on the computer. There was only so many places to go. So I actually asked my mom to help me buy my first domain name at like 12. And that's how kind of fiercely I was interested in those things. And I built a WordPress site. I had like little communities. I loved to make vector art, but I couldn't afford Adobe Illustrator. So I think it was called like Paint Shop Pro, and I was part of a community of people who made something called Vexels, which was a combination of vector and pixels, and we were just people who liked using the pen tool but couldn't afford Illustrator. So I was pretty online as a kid, and it wasn't necessarily like, you know, because no one was watching or anything. It was just a strange result of the fact that we had to stay local, and there was a really important reason why I wasn't, you know, being able to be shuffled from event to event in a, let's say, quote unquote normal way, but I don't mind what that looked like. But my first paid gig was a woman in town who was starting her own business to stage homes. So before, you know, they got sold, and someone had said, oh, this, you know, this young girl is creating websites on WordPress. She could probably make you one. And I got introduced, and I probably got paid like $100 or something, but I felt pretty good about it at the time.
Oh, that's all the money in the world when you're 14.
Yeah. And I checked on it like years after. It was still up for a while, but it's not anymore.
$100 at that point, you could almost, well, actually, Adobe Illustrator at that point was like, what, like $400 for Illustrator, whatever version at that time. So
yeah, and I might be getting this wrong, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure it was only on Macs.
Oh, okay.
So you also had to buy a MacBook or an Apple computer in order to use it. So there was the extra threshold there.
Yeah. Well, that's unobtainable at 14, both of those together.
Yep. Yeah. You had to work with what you had, which is why I was making Vexel art instead of vector art.
I think at 14, I was playing around with Flash on like someone's bootleg version that they had downloaded on, I don't know if it was like Pirate Bay or one of those like websites to steal programs, and just passed it off on like CD to me. So that's kind of like where I was at the same period in my life, trying to like teach myself animation and doing a really shit job of it.
It was like the Wild West then, because these programs were so new, and it wasn't like you could really Google it at the time. I remember just you would mess around until you figured it out, or you had to like get on a forum. That was my experience
Mm-hmm.
to troubleshoot it. It was different.
Yeah, and there wasn't like a million YouTube videos about how to do everything that you could possibly want to do. So finding those type of communities to learn from, I think helped a lot of people to grow in their skills and kind of stumble their way through.
That's how I feel about my early design days. Just don't make me pull up the art. That's all I ask.
I don't even know if you would be able to find it on hand. If you had that, that would be pretty amazing of you.
I have some. I found a folder. I am like, this is just a side note, but I'm like a digital detoxer, or I'm the tidy person in a digital sense at times with my own personal life. So from computer to computer, phone to phone, making sure that I'm really taking care of my archives. And so I found things that I was making in my teenage years. I found screenshots of websites I had designed. I will not be publishing them back on the internet, but it was definitely something I was glad I held on to. It really makes you realize how far you've come.
Yeah, for sure. We've established a lot of where you were as a kid and this personal drive. We established your kind of traditional background at Pratt. And then I'm curious how that led to starting practice and how you got from designer post-graduation, I believe it was 2013 that you said, into starting practice.
Because I could code in college, I always had pretty good internships. I wasn't always the best designer, or I don't think I was always at the places that I was because of that, but I was able to work really well with developers and help people launch sites, even though I was not that experienced. And I felt like oftentimes I was the designer that was translating the developers for the designers as like an intern level. And I feel like I got my foot in the door because of code. And by the time I had graduated, my portfolio was not just student work, and I think gave me a leg up when it came to applying to jobs. It looked like I had more experience, even though I was fresh out of school. And I got a job at Red Antler. I really love this part of the story because I'm really close to this person still. But the person who hired me, Simon Andres, who interviewed me, I had applied as a web designer because that's what I knew. And they looked at my portfolio, and I don't know exactly why. I have some inclinations maybe, but they said, you can have a job here, but as a brand designer, not as a web designer. And that's how I got into brand design, was just someone saying, actually, I don't think you are a web designer.
I feel like we have to dive a little bit deeper. So what did they see in your portfolio that gave them that cue that you were more of a brand designer than a web designer?
One of my student projects was a diary I had kept every day in the form of a logo. So I'd sit down at the end of the day and make a logo for that day. And then I'd write a sentence or two, and I printed this huge, Logopedia poster of the course of the semester, but then also had a diary format and a web format. And I think obviously we can equate logo design with branding, but I was able to translate it from a book to a poster to a website. And obviously, you work in this world, but that's definitely brand, is thinking about how you can have a consistent voice across different touch points and different media.
How was your experience working at Red Antler?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've definitely paved the way in many ways of how people were willing to invest in brand. I really respect what they were doing. Whether I was that aware at that age, I was in my early 20s, I'm not quite sure, but something drew me there. I was definitely there in the heyday of when I feel like they hit the map. The first project I ever launched at Red Antler was the mattress Casper. I was on a team of many people. It was not just me. But that definitely put them on the map, and they got really busy. So I had a great experience because I was really hungry, and they were at a place where everyone wanted to work with them, and there was a lot of really great opportunity. By not entirely their fault, I burnt out, I think in part because I was really hungry and I was a little overzealous. I didn't have a very long tenure there, and we can get into like how I got into the next part of my career. I was there for a little under 2 years, but by the end I was doing all this art direction for them and had really kind of fast tracked my career in terms of experience. I'm really grateful for it. It was like brand and art direction boot camp.
Or what was the most valuable thing that you learned from your experience at Red Antler?
When I call it boot camp, it's not because it was drill sergeant. It's because there were so many different types of projects. So I would be on a tech project one week. I'd be working on a massive rebrand the other. I'd be launching a new fashion brand the next one. And there was just a huge range. And, you know, when you're in this place where you're really putting forward out a lot of work, and I was producing a lot of work at the time, you couldn't rest on your laurels and use the same devices across such different projects. So I had to constantly push myself as a designer to say like, okay, how am I going to make a system work in this landscape with this kind of narrative, with these kind of challenges? So the kind of, I would say, visual palette I had to build for myself and understand what I thrived in had a really wide breadth.
After your tenure, your 2 years there, what happened after you left Red Antler?
I burnt myself out. I was working really hard. I didn't really have a portfolio, but I just knew I needed to stop in order to like even know what my next move was. So thank God I was young because this was a risky one, but I just kind of quit with no plan. And I had 2 months of saved up to live in New York and support myself. So for the first month, I designed and coded myself a new website so I could find jobs. And then I went out interviewing, and I really at the time was like, there was no interest in being a freelancer. I don't think I even was aware of that as an option for myself. I was so new to my career, and typically you have to have built up more of a reputation. But I started interviewing at agencies, and I just wasn't finding the right fit. Whether that was like culturally or something about it wasn't exciting me, the type of work. So I started taking on side projects for petty cash, and the majority of them were this similar kind of work where I was creating the pitch decks for founders to go to investors at a time where they needed to kind of resurface a category or a product to appeal, have that glossy millennial look, and they needed their investors to know that they could do that. So I'd help them come up with like a temporary name for it, a temporary look and feel, build out all the fundraising materials. So they were kind of like fake brands is what I like to say. And it was not a lot, but it was enough to keep me going. And I kept doing that for a few months while I tried to find the right fit. And before I knew it, a bunch of those founders turned around and said, hey, I got funding. Everyone really received the work well. Would you want to build this brand? And I, from then on, was an independent brand builder. And that's where I really got my start and my first set of clients.
How are you able to find these founders in order to make these pitch decks, these fake brands, and then eventually help them to get that funding?
I think a lot of them first just kind of started looking for designers, and I did have a portfolio. I did have a lot of DTC experience. So, I could definitely help them. And I was just, seen as design talent at the time, but it changed really quickly, actually, how, my job changed, how my skill set changed, what people were coming to me changed. But at the time it was just like, oh, we need something cheap, fast, and easy. It wasn't glamorous. And I needed something to help pay the rent.
Exactly. I mean, that's how every freelancer kind of gets going. I feel like you don't know exactly what you're worth. You need to pay the rent, and you'll take most things without even questioning it. Or if you do question it, not too much, so that you can at least get the experience on with your solo name. Was there a pivotal moment when you transitioned from Michelle Mattar into being practice, or did you establish that at the beginning?
No, it took me a long time to land on practice and to be bigger than what I would describe as this one-woman show. I operated as an independent brand builder under my name for 6 or more years. And I like to say that during that time, I got probably the best secondhand business degree ever, because the way I was working was so early stage. So I was usually the first person behind a founder and gained their trust before they had a team, before, they really had a lot to work with. And I was the person they would call in the middle of the night, or I was the person that was there to help them solve supply chain or figure out certain elements of a product. When it came to going to launch the brand, I was helping them vet and hire PR teams and narrate the stories. I was looking at how to manage their socials. So I very quickly kind of left the designer seat and was building through business strategy, brand strategy, through growth strategy. And it was going really well. The first brand I ever launched kind of as, this one full independent was a vitamin called Ritual. And that really helped to show people exactly what I was capable of. And that I was someone who was thinking on all these different fronts, because that was really one of those 0 to 100 kind of brand launches, even helped them with their fundraising materials to get to seed. So those kinds of projects always help lead to the next ones. Over time in this, process, or I called it my brand building practice. I think brand identity and brand building are two very different things. And I built up certain processes and a pretty profound sense of empathy for what it actually means to run a brand. I remember about 4 years into that process, I looked at my work and I was like, you're doing it all wrong. You're delivering PDFs. You're not delivering brands. What is this? And I kind of rethought my own processes, re-examined what it meant for a brand to exist in the landscapes I was building for, what kind of deliverables I was making, and if they were right, or if they were what I thought were normal or standard or industry. And so the name practice kind of always stuck with me in that. And the reason why I started it in the very first place was over those years, I was saying no to these opportunities that were just bigger than one person. And I eventually hit a wall where two things happened. One was I realized I was going to be building the same scale things forever and not challenging myself and growing and not understanding what exactly I was capable of because I was limited to being one person. And then my dream project showed up, this project that I was like, oh my God, I had described a project similar in my head to people. And it was a huge scale. They wanted to launch with 450 products in multiple retail stores. And I said yes, and I knew I could get I could get like up to 4 or 5 months in the timeline until that was going to start breaking. And I spent those 4 or 5 months ideating how I was going to build something bigger than me, but keep my brand building practices and the things that I knew that, that worked in the kind of work I was building.
I think it's probably a crucial moment to jump into your personal definition of brand and how that's different from brand identity, and what practice does is brand building. So if you could help us to kind of clarify that, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, I wish I had like a super succinct answer for this, but I do have a metaphor, which is that I think brands nowadays are much more akin to celebrities. And if we think about a celebrity, they have different ways that they show up, different ways that their brands show up. They change over time and they have values. They have conversations that they're having with people. And in many ways, I think when we talk about brands, and actually part of what wakes me up to do this work every day is that brands have huge amount of influence on our culture. The same as celebrities, similar as politics, they're massively influential. So while you can, like, something I believe, and maybe this rubs some people the wrong way, but maybe the world doesn't need more brands, and I don't think that the world does, it does need brands to do better, and you can really positively impact culture. But brand identity, I think, is very different than this idea of how something might move or shift cultures, how it might have conversations and values. Brand identity is maybe how we might recognize a brand, but a brand is much larger and more complicated than that. And people expect much more than, you know, the baseline of what might be delivered with brand identity.
Do you approach pre-seed branding differently than, let's say, Series A, B, C, D, etc.?
Yeah, so we do have some ways in which we help people before fundraising, before they can make a full investment in brand, but we do have a tried and true process for building brands that I developed over the years, and I don't stray from that in the full exercise. One of the things I believe that really works in that process is that we take the time to design out like the teenage phase and really kind of grow it to the adult phase, and have a really strong track record. It's pretty much 100% over the years of all the brands that I've put to market look exactly like one of those directions in the first presentation. And I don't think that's an accident. That is really because of taking that extra time to make sure that it's a fully baked idea, that the whole narrative is built in there, that, because we wait to do design until we've built out all of the communications, the narration, the strategies, the values, that design is there to communicate an idea more than it is to just be, a visual representation.
And what are those different aspects of that brand process? So kind of diving under the hood and taking a look behind your practice at practice or your process at practice. So you had mentioned brand values, the narrative, the stories. What are the other kind of components, like the non-visual side of things that people may not be thinking about at the moment, but need to in order to kind of build brands instead of brand identities?
Something that surprises people a lot about our work is how much research there is. And for example, if we work on a rebrand, we do a whole audit and research project. And we have an auditing process that I've worked to develop over the years to help understand where the equity lies in the existing brand and where the general heat map is of what's motivating people, what's frustrating people, what's concerning people in this category, and really diving into like empathy of the customer. I'd say we build customer first brands. So it's certainly a good amount of research goes into that. We also, I'd say about half of the projects we work on come to us with maybe a prototype of what they want to build, but half of them come to us with the very nothing. It's the very beginning of an idea. So we work with them to build that product and the rationale around it. And that also looks like market research. So, an example I can give, it hasn't launched, so it's going to be a little bit shrouded in mystery, is working in the sexual health space to identify what kinds of products do people need? Why are they looking for them? What kind of price points are they looking for? But what values are there? And then working from there to establish what kinds of doctors do we need to help us formulate this? What are the kinds of products we're going to do and why? And what rationales do we have to help serve the customer? Why do we believe in them? And then going into the full process of prototyping, testing, reviews, and feedback. So when I talk about building brands, it's also building the product. And that's a really important component of what a brand serves, especially in like that B2C world, but it's the narration around it. But once you've spent that much time, our projects take anywhere from 1 to 3 years. You become the secondhand expert and really are seeking to elevate a category, I think, because you're so deeply entrenched in it.
1 to 3 years might scare a large percentage of the audience out there. I think there's a lot of people churning and burning through projects, and their business model is built around velocity to some degree. It's a different mindset, I imagine, becoming like a true partner with the clients that you are choosing to work with. How do you vet and choose those particular partners? Because that is like a true relationship. That's longer than some people's marriages in some cases. So I'm curious what factors you look for when choosing a partner.
I make this joke sometimes because we sign on a full project launch all at once. So in many ways, one of my hardest challenges, I think, in my career has been that I've been trying to build a different business model. And I don't think I actually necessarily knew that getting into it. I just knew how to do great work and that I need to build a business that could do great work. But we're not a shop in that traditional way. We never just do a website or just a package design. It's always kind of thinking through the mission criticals of how we put something to market or relaunch something into market. So there's a few things that we look for. One is certainly founder chemistry, because we're going to be working with these people for a long time. Do they have the right values as us? Do they want to empower us to do great work in the way that we know we need to do? And are they going to be great partners back? And our business model isn't right for everyone. There is a certain type of person it's really great for, and it's actually the people that are very skeptical of agencies. Practice doesn't have any project managers. We don't have any client directors. You work with everyone, and everyone works on all of the projects together. And I think that model really helps some people sleep at night, of knowing exactly who your team is, the full transparency of it, the fact that, we only take on so many people and everyone's important. The next thing is, do we believe in this product? I'm very passionate about making sure that we're building brands that are, practicing ethical commerce and want to raise the bar. So I vet our clients for their alignment to sustainability. We mandate sustainability research for all physical goods and have a process for that. So that's a pretty easy swipe left, swipe no, process to see, are we right for each other or not? If someone says no to that, then we're probably not aligned. And then beyond that, it's really like, what are we excited by? We've been lucky to maintain a wait list for most of the time because we only take on so much. So we've been able to select what moves forward. And so far it's been wonderful. I think I get to learn from some really intelligent people also, because I'm, as much as I'm leading a team on my side, we're all leading this bigger project together. And I kind of function as a creative leadership and get to learn from all different types of leadership around me from our clients.
I have so many questions. they're all good ones. So I'm curious, the team makeup at Practice, how many people do you have, and what does like a project team look like?
Everyone works on everything. We are 6 people full time.
Okay.
So everyone's a creative, more or less. I would say everyone's identifying as a creative. I function as a creative director, a designer at times, and a writer at times, strategist, so kind of cross teams. We have a seat for a copywriter strategist. We have 3 designers, and then we have someone that helps support on all practice initiatives. And that's something that's really important, but we can get into the work that we do. So they kind of help run things internally, because a lot of my role is consulting. And so I need to make sure that we can really serve that partnership model, and that we can still be there. Part of what I love about what I've built at Practice and what we're all doing is that, if you're partnered with Practice, it doesn't matter if it's not in scope, we're there for it. It's not so much about deliverables in the way that we work.
That's going to open up another question, but I want to touch on a few others first. You said you had a pretty steady wait list. I'm curious, how many projects do you have going at any given time at Practice, and what's that kind of cutoff number? And then I'm assuming it's when you finish one, then you can touch on your wait list and then figure out who's a good fit for any given time in any given project.
I would say pretty consistently we sign on a partner per quarter. So at any given time, we're maintaining anywhere from 3 to 5 new brands. Occasionally we're building things for existing brands that we've launched. But they're all in different phases, and some of them can hit, I think, compared to my friends that own studios, and I have a great network and I care so much about them and building community in that way. I think we're one of the only teams I know that beg our clients for feedback so we can move faster. But we're there truly through the road bumps, and there are sometimes some slowdown periods where we're working through supply chain or putting a new idea through testing in FDA departments. And like, we have to just find other ways to fill the time. But typically it's 3 to 5 and everyone works on everything together. Which I think has created a really great sense of brand building at the team. I don't like to divide the lines in the sands. And so I believe that if you want to be a brand builder, all designers need to be strategists and all strategists need to appreciate the power of design. So we have all of those conversations together.
Curious about when you got into sustainability, because it seems like it's interwoven into the fabric of practice. So when did that become important for you, or when did you notice that?
Yeah, it was actually like a moment, like a bell ringing off. Kind of cinematic in a sense for me, at least, where it was right after Ritual had launched. And, I had this first example of what I was able to do. And it was a success, like pretty much overnight, actually. And more than they expected. They were doing fulfillment out of their office and there were stacks of boxes everywhere. And we had to get these huge carts. I came and visited and they were full of, all of these shipments. And I suddenly just looked at this room and these carts and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I realized like I had created this vitamin that was trendy. And I was definitely a big part of that and why that was happening. And I had measured the success of my packaging by how good it looked. And I didn't think about other units of measurement. And I looked at this box that people were loving and there was all this extra space in it. And sure, it like presented the product beautifully to you, but it was unnecessary. And there were all these other things I kind of just woke up to. And I remember turning to the founder and saying, what if the box was just for the first month? Can we please change recurring shipments? It was a subscription business. And they said yes. And I realized that just then and there, like I have a power as a designer to make an impact. It's just that you have to have a different unit of measurement. From that moment forward, I actually worked with them to reduce that footprint initially, and I think revise my own design once I understood that it wasn't successful in my opinion. Whether other people were seeing that or not, but I thought it could be more successful. And then I mandated sustainability for all of my projects thereon as an independent. So as for the next 5 or so years, working just as one person, I was doing all the sustainability research. And being a freelancer for that long or an independent for that long, you have to build a community. It's way too isolating. And, I love all of my clients, but there's still that relationship and you need something. So I had this great network and I realized I was sending this like massive spreadsheet I had built off and people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you. Every time someone had a project. And I was so happy to share it because in my eyes, like we're all going to do better work if we have those kind of resources. And I just had this second moment where I was like, wait a second. There's no reason why this, like all this sustainability knowledge I've built over the years should be some kind of trade secret. This should be accessible. That's where it's going to do its best work. So I created Waste Not. And then over the years, I've just continued to keep doing the sustainability scopes, but at much larger scales. So, where I used to be launching one product to market with one brand, I've worked on launching 450 products to market with 3 retail stores in multiple countries. So the scale and scope of that research and the kinds of companies that I could look at and understand how they work and talk to has changed. So I've certainly been able to grow in that part of my field quite a lot through just the access of these kinds of projects that we work on and the level of depth that we're in as the partnership model.
So the bell rang, the boxes tumbling metaphorically around you, encompassing you was too much.
Yeah, and I'm not saying they're so beautiful, and me being like, I'm not sure anymore. I don't think they are beautiful, actually. I think I made a mistake. Yeah.
I'm curious about the other units of measurement that equal success to you are.
I often think when building brands that part of the process is that I'm equipping the teams on the other side to kind of be the people that I'm going to pass that torch to, and they're going to continue building that brand. It doesn't stop once the brand has launched. So when I find that, one of the things I filter for is someone that doesn't want like a quick exit. They're not there to make a quick buck, but a big unit of measurement is when the teams are really aligned to the goals and the mission, when, they're very proud of what they're building, when they're really entrenched in those details of the vision, and it's larger than just a successful product.
So is that kind of touching on that ethical commerce, which you had mentioned before?
Yeah. So an example would be, we built a brand called All Kinds, and it's there to represent all kinds of kids. And, watching the team go forward with this idea that, there's no such thing as a flaw in a kid. And this, one of the values of that brand is that we have to be very careful that there's no flaws or fixes. It's not frizzy hair. There's nothing to make them self-conscious about. And then watching them go on to find charity partners years later that align to that mission, to donate money towards it, to cast disabled children in an authentic way in their photo shoots, and to have great representation. Those are the kinds of things that I think are just really great metrics of success, that early brand building is working. And it's allowing them through new opportunities and new challenges to raise the bar that brands need to be doing as they grow and evolve.
You had mentioned filling the time. And when you have certain projects that are either in a slow period or you can't move forward with anything, what's your favorite way to fill the time?
Yeah, we have two that we do every year. And so the first one we call Just for Practice, and we create fake brands. We decide on a team as to what the concept is. We make all the decisions together, and then eventually create a brand just for fun. And I think it's really wonderful to see everyone, have this stakeholder process. It improves our communication as a team, but it's also a wonderful creative exercise. The most recent one we did was called Dirt Baby, and we created a fake backpack for plants. We made like fake merch for it and just had a lot of fun. And I think that just really helped improve our communication skills also, and build greater empathy for the kind of work that each person does or their working style by not having a client. And the other one is that we donate a design project every year. We just took applications, and we're actually voting on Monday as a team as to who we'll donate to. But that's always been really wonderful. The last one we did there was guerrilla newspaper for anti-racism. So we worked with this group called Outer Work and their founder, Linnea Sims, to build all these materials on anti-racism and documents, interview people of color about their stories and what kind of initiatives they're doing. And then we printed 3,500 copies at a local print shop called Linco and distributed them to, I think it was 25 different cities. We set up street teams, and then people in all these cities dropped them at like libraries, cafes, colleges, all over the place. So that's part of filling the time. I think giving back is really important, and also building that team culture and talking about these things that we care about is great. But a surprise of it all is that our timelines are so long, and it's a really wonderful relief to us to have these occasional things that take, quick decisions and get put out there, and they mix it up.
And when you're doing these either fake brand projects or these pro bono projects, are you weaving them in with the other client work, or do you have like days of the week where you're like, okay, Friday is our we're working on our stuff project day? How do you kind of fit the time together?
Yeah, so historically, we first started off that Fridays were non-client work. So work Monday through Thursday on client work, and then Fridays would be things like the Just for Practice fake brand, or the donated project, or building case studies, building social assets, whatever we needed to do. As I mentioned, we all work on everything together. So it was, I think, a more fun way than saying like, hey, can you figure this thing out? And all being stakeholders. I changed that this year to actually being like a period of time every month because we all felt similarly creatively, and feedback is so important. Like, it's how everything improves. I love feedback. And I had this thought, and then a couple people brought it up, and we are like, man, it'd be nice to like put pen to paper on the project and then have another day and another day. So we started blocking out quick periods of time to work on them every month, where we would put client work aside for a longer period of time, which I think we have a lot of flexibility because, when you have a single deliverable based product, you kind of want to get that done as soon as possible. But when we just have a launch date, we are more flexible in how we can work on things and when.
I am obsessed with making either passion projects or like fake brands and creating work for yourself. I love that you're doing a pro bono project. That may be something I have to think about and maybe steal from you. So maybe we'll touch.
Please do.
Yeah, I want to. I mean, I think that's beautiful.
We actually have more applications than we can take, so I could send you some of them if there any are interesting. Like I said, we're going to vote on it on Monday, so I could share.
Cool. Yeah,
definitely share.
Honestly, I hope we can open it up. Maybe the community at large can take on some of these important pro bono projects. When you're vetting pro bono projects, who are the type of people that are submitting? How do they know to submit? Is it just through your social media? And then ultimately, is there some sort of like guideline you use to choose the pro bono project that you're working on?
Yeah, so we launched the applications on social media. Across our channels, I'd say Instagram has provided the most applications probably. But I think this year we got a couple dozen applications. We have a sign-up form, and the main criteria here is that it has to be for a specific purpose. It's not for profit. They don't have to be a registered 501c3, but they do have to not be necessarily looking to make money. And they have to have a really clear goal in mind. So we're not there to just kind of like support them ongoing. It's like one actionable project. So we built the form for that. But then within that, I think it's one of my favorite side effects of it is, as a team, we get to talk about what we're passionate about outside of work, what kind of meaningful initiatives there are, and feel really charged up about who we can support as a team. But it's always wonderful to just see all the great work that people are doing and can use support on.
Well, I think that's why I like all of these fake projects. I'm going to call them fake, or not in the case of the pro bono, but like building fake brands like Dirt Baby, this backpack for plants. And I feel like we got to dive in a little bit more there. But you get to see a different side of either the agency or the person. And it really does unveil what they're interested in and what they spend their time on outside of work. So I'm curious where Dirt Baby came from. Who has this love for plants, or is it everyone? And where did this funny but also really clever idea come from?
We have a thing called Let's Get Coffee, and most of us are in New York, but we are a distributed team. And so the reason why we started that up was just to kind of have like the water cooler non-meeting talk. And sometimes we'd come up with a reason for it, but mostly it was just like, let's just all hang out and have an open-ended conversation without a goal. And so we would start talking about, and I think this is a really great testament to the fact that we do like our jobs. We would talk about ideas for fake brands in our non-meeting meetings. And quite a few came up over the course of many Let's Get Coffees. So we made a whole list and eventually all discussed it. There was like a theme park for stoners was one idea that was pretty popular.
I feel like everything would be wrapped in like bubble wrap or be really soft.
Yeah, very like sensory, but for adults, and maybe more like meditative or like, a way to decompress, get off your phone. Devices for people with really long nails, a coffee shop called Drug Dealers. Like, we were all just messing around. But at one point we were talking about how, if getting pets is kind of like the new having children that we're seeing as a trend. is the next getting pets going to be your plants? Like, is it going to progress even farther than like, oh no, don't have children, just get a dog. No, don't get a dog, just get a plant. And that joking led us to the concept of dirt baby, of like, what if people babied their plants? And we kind of voted there. We all do naming exercises as a team. So we crafted a whole giant list of names. We do these big name storms, and it was really fun when we all saw dirt baby. We were all like, that's it. Like, it was just such a unanimous team decision. Some were harder, but that one was a very much like, yep, we got it.
Nice. I fall into the camp of being that person that like names plants and talks to them. I get that from my mom. She like names every plant. She like talks to it like it's a child. So we have a cactus that we named Barbara's Spike Stand, and there's a couple of others that we have named along the way. But I love that idea. That's super fun, and it seems that it does produce impact, because I was able to read the feature on Creative Boom and kind of see the impact of that work. Have you noticed any other direct correlations on the impact of building fake brands for your business?
Yeah, actually, it was accidental, but it has been like our best organic PR was actually the donated project. And I think, I mean, I feel like we can all kind of, but these have been hard times. And I think seeing teams donating their time, but doing the kind of work that they love is refreshing. And I wasn't expecting this. I just, wanted to create some sort of charitable giving program and put this forward to the team, and got excitement. And, we started it. But that was actually, I think, one of the top 10 most read articles, that donated design project on Creative Boom that year. So it's all been organic, but it has been accidental. I think seeing people enjoying their jobs, or seeing non-client work that is using, I think, actionable skills, maybe is part of it, but can't say that I really know. We've just been having fun and, doing our thing. And it is important to me, this whole business model, the whole thing I'm building, is to stay close to the work and to keep challenging myself. So to create those spaces for us as a team is equally as important than, my own career.
Do you think that you would ever change or maybe like adapt the business model that you have, or are you like super happy with it and its structure currently? Or do you see any like wiggle room of how you would change it in the future?
That's a great question. No one's ever actually asked me that. I do sometimes dream of having a co-founder or cohort of some sense. But in the process, I've built such an amazing group of people to just make sure I'm always kind of checks and balancing on my own thing. And my team, we're very collaborative and very transparent for a reason. Is like, I want to make sure that I'm not just at the top making decisions in an isolation chamber, and that everyone's a part of that. I have this pipe dream, and I don't know how achievable it is, but eventually I would love to have practice dial down the client work for a certain percentage and to create a brand foundry. So I think we're kind of like an incubator, and to create our own concepts. And I have a few ideas of how we would do that, but the just for practice fake brands are kind of like the start of this idea of what would happen if we made our own brands. But right now, because our projects are so long, I'm just building our next generation of brands, and then making the space for us to grow as a team. Those are two really big challenges, so I don't want to overdo it.
So with this pipe dream of being like a brand foundry, is that similar to what Jin Lane did with pattern brands and kind of building out these specific products and then building websites and actually selling things? I'm not exactly sure their business model, so I don't want to overstep or put words in their mouth. Or is it more of that you'd like to kind of join in partnership and fund other companies and kind of be a partner and build them?
Yeah, so I don't actually have a huge desire to run brands long term. How hard that is, and it's a very different job.
Yeah.
I'm very close with all of our clients post-launch, and we help them at moments of scale, but the ongoing operations is a lot. I've actually built a few brands in this methodology, and so the way that I would see it happening, if I can accomplish the pipe dream, which don't hold your breath, is actually to shop the founders. So we kind of build things and then say who's the right person to lead this, and bring them in at the right time in the fold. And I've done that a few times where maybe it was like, practice in a venture firm or myself in a venture firm, building a brand and then working backwards to find who is going to lead that. And then offering them back, a certain percentage of that in trade for that handoff.
I like that. That's a very cool kind of business model or approach because you're in there helping to build the business from the ground up. I mean, finding the CEO to run it is a big freaking deal.
Yeah, definitely. And that would be a big percentage that they get. But it's also, right now, in many ways, we talk about this at Practice. Practice is at times a company that builds companies. When we're approached with just a category, we're really building a company with our clients in that way. So it does not feel out of reach. And it does feel like we can pick up a lot of that heavy lifting and set things up and we have a pretty good track record of it. So maybe, but it is a dream.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm actively working on it. It is just something that definitely the team knows is a dream that maybe would explore in a few years. But right now, really focused on building these generations of brands and really excited about the work that we're doing.
It seems like you have the ability to scale up if you really desired. What is your ideal agency size? And do you like staying around that 6-person mark, or do you have any desire to kind of expand in the future?
Yeah, I don't.
I'm with you. I don't really want to be big either. I
I
like being nimble.
better. Like the thing is, and people always say this, like you become a manager, but also I think that we solve a problem for our clients in this model, and that the offering would change. So I do think part of it needs to stay that way. That being said, there's always chances for evolving and growth, and then there's people in the company that could advance and jobs that they had that might, be left open. So I think we would never probably get bigger than 10, but maybe there's a chance for it to grow a bit.
How do you balance running your team and also your just individual life and just like that work-life balance of everything? Because I've seen on your Twitter that you do personal projects as well, whether that's illustration or just other doodling and noodling. So I'm curious how you make the time outside of work, because I have the issue of not being able to turn off my brain, especially late at night. So I'm curious if that afflicts you as well, or how you're able to manage your time.
Yeah. I'm not perfect, so please don't hear this answer like I figured it all out. But something we talk about a lot of Practice is like it's just a job. And so I encourage people to go work remotely for extended periods of time. We actually have a lot of people that are international. I work remotely for extended periods of time or travel. But that I think boundaries are important in life. And I think that's something that I try to remind myself. So I actually separated my personal practice from practice. And so I do a lot of these fun, just for fun projects outside of it. And that actually, I think that boundary has helped me a lot. And, I'm writing a graphic novel. I do like to illustrate, but I don't have, it's kind of silly to use that time when I have bigger fish to fry on any given day. So it allows me to not feel guilty about it too. But I do think a lot of times, like I'll have the itch to work on the weekend or certain things, or sometimes, things get a little busier, but I'll always remind myself, like, that's your job and you have a life to live. don't make it more than a job.
How many months out of the year are you somewhere else other than New York? And what are some of your favorite places to sabbatical in? And then any tips for people who are looking to apply this in their own lives? So we can start at the beginning of how many months roughly are you somewhere else working?
Yeah, probably about 2 months of the year, sometimes back to back. I think it's important, like, one of the ways you can find inspiration is to change your surroundings if you're not finding it in yourself. So it actually creatively feels important. But we also have a sabbatical program. And when I was first setting up, everything to do with our benefits, that was something really important to me. I couldn't imagine, as someone who was independent and freelance for so long, to work for like 5 years and never take a break. So I built that into employment practice that, every 2 years or so, you're able to take a break. And that, I know you were talking about it before, but I think, capitalism, it's like, it makes you feel like you just have to keep being on this machine, and it doesn't have to be that way. You can find ways.
This is a question for the freelancer version of you. When you were planning those breaks, were you saving small amounts consistently to be able to afford that sabbatical? Because I think a lot of people, whether they're solopreneurs, freelancing, they're just so focused on paying the rent and getting to the next project to do that. So did you have a method or a system for kind of that building up funds to take that sabbatical?
Yeah, I actually would rent my place out and then travel in places with a lower cost of living. So I would spend less in the sabbatical months than I was, I mostly lived in New York, but I also lived in LA, and the cost of living there is really high. So as example, as a freelancer, I went to Oaxaca for over a month. And my cost of living there was very affordable, and I had covered my expenses back home. So that was one way to hack it. And I've still done it that way recently, actually.
That's a good way to do it. I was curious if you were renting out your place or just kind of like making sure rent was paid and then saving enough in order to take that trip. But that makes it very doable. And is that just on Airbnb you're doing that, or a different way?
Back in the day, I did Airbnb. I don't know if I recommend it for where you live, but I was fresh to LA, and I didn't really have, I had sold like most of my personal items anyways, so I didn't care as much. But now it's usually through friends. I've done housing swaps. Thankfully, I live in New York, and a lot of people are usually looking for a place to crash. So I haven't had to ever like rent to strangers. Usually it's more about just covering costs than it is about like, any huge economy type thing, but just affording myself the opportunity. And, you grow and change a lot. I've gone to places recurringly for extended periods of time and built little communities in them, and gone to places where I don't speak the language. And I think it's important as a person to challenge yourself like that.
Do you have any places that you particularly loved going?
Unfortunately, sometimes a place I love to go is not a great place to work remotely. So I have a lot of family in Beirut. I would love to work remotely there, but between the power outages and all sorts of things combined with the time difference, it's not awesome. I started going to Costa Rica. I had a friend that moved there. There's a friend from New York. They're a yoga instructor, and was like, you know what, I'm just going to go give it a try. And I went out and visited them. And I started going every year. I went for 3 months one year to the same town. And I've gone back 4 years since. So that's been really nice. It's like part of what I love about that experience. The town is called Nosara. It's like a yoga surf town. Is that I can settle into different pace of life and just kind of like feel how my body might change or my brain might change when, things close at 8 p.m. and it takes, the roads aren't paved. It takes longer to get somewhere. I can't get everything in an instant. And just like allow myself to have a different lifestyle for a period of time and see what that does mentally, physically, emotionally.
I do think that it's funny how impactful just changing your surroundings can influence the way that you think, the way that you feel, and your creative output. And that can be as simple as literally changing where you're working. So if you sit at your kitchen table and do your job, maybe just going somewhere, a coffee shop 2 towns over, will change your perspective and get you out of like your traditional setting. But obviously it's like 10x, 100x when you get out of your own individual culture and into someone else's, and to become a part of that and embrace a lifestyle that you didn't have. It is like life-changing in a true sense of the word, because you are living a different life than you were prior. And I think that that's been really impactful. And another reason of why I like to work with people from other countries and different cultures, because it truly enriches and shifts my perspective and makes me different and more empathetic and accepting of all people in different walks of life. So I found it invaluable as well in order to do great and empathetic creative work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like one of my favorite, this is corny, but I love this quote of like of travel. One of my favorite ways to think about it is the magic of returning to a place that's exactly the same, like coming home from a trip. It's unchanged, but you are, and you can feel all the ways in which you changed. And you can get that from understanding where someone comes from. We have team members that are, one's from Hungary, one grew up in India, went to high school in Thailand, and I always love just kind of hearing about how they arrived at New York and with design, and how we came from all these different crazy pathways to the same place, and the world just looks really different through their experiences as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of truly magical in like the sense of the word.
Yeah, it has been for me. And I actually kind of do some of the similar work in brand building. I always say like we have to look outside the category for inspiration. It's important, I think, to just like leave the comfort zone of where you are and say like, okay, what would happen if we examined a totally different industry, but through the lens of what we're trying to build.
Mm.
And you gain more empathy for like, what kind of challenges you're up against. You understand some of the things that are different. Maybe there's some invisible lines blocking you that you didn't see.
At this point of the podcast, I always like to ask some fast, fun, and furious questions. So I wanted to know what you're reading right now at Practice Book Club, and what have been some of your favorite books personally to you, whether that's business or just a personal read.
So right now we're reading Just Kids by Patti Smith. We came off of reading Creative Act, and that was very informational, but not a clear narrative strung through.
Mm-hmm.
And we all elected on that one. It's been wonderful to talk about. It's really beautifully written, but also it's like, through an artist's eyes, but also through the portal of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our current book club book. In terms of books that have influenced me, I definitely as a kid was like just rummaging through the shelves, and I think I discovered a lot of like my passion for graphic design just through that, of like being like, what is here. And my father had a lot of graphic novels, so we would read Tintin in French a lot.
Oh, nice.
So that I think really informed like a graphic language for me and a love for that. As well as all these like illustrated type books of foliage and trees and the kind of encyclopedias that were visual. Definitely set me into a bit of an adventure. But I'm a fiction reader, I would say, mostly. I really love fiction. Funnily enough, our practice book club books are different, but it's been satisfying.
I'm mainly a nonfiction reader. Do you have a favorite fiction book that you come back to time and time again?
I'm a nerd, so I've reread like Dune a few times and things like that. I like other worlds and world building in that way. I think that's part of why I started writing graphic novels. I was interested in that, and if we think about it, branding has a little bit to do with that.
Oh, for sure.
But I would say like some of those sci-fi classics are really worth a read. I've actually never watched Game of Thrones because I've been trying to find the time to read those novels. Not a small undertaking though.
No, well, that's the thing. Like, I've had conversations with people, and every new season of Game of Thrones that came out, they would rewatch the old seasons. I would say probably read it. That probably makes more sense than.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so different to interpret an imagined world than it is to, see someone's visualization of it. I love those little discrepancies of like where your brain takes it and then where another creative imagine.
Keeping on the specific question of books, since we just talked about graphic novels, you had mentioned Dune for classic reads, but is there a graphic novel that you would claim as your favorite at the moment?
I wouldn't say at the moment that there's like one that I've read really recently. I think Persepolis is a nice one. Just thinking, it's interesting when people go into history as well. I think we always think of them as, a little bit more like futuristic or alien or what, superheroes, but there are a lot of graphic novels written about the past, and I think they're a really nice way to examine them. One that's really left a mark on me is called Habibi. It's quite long, but it's a really beautiful story, and it was really nice to read like such a culturally grounded story.
Oh, this is a new one. So you're the first one I'm asked this to. But I heard this quote and it really stuck with me. It's a quote from Naval Ravikant. If your life played out 1,000 times, 1,000 different iterations of your life, what would be true in 999 of them? So what would the things that you would want to keep consistent in all of those iterations of your life?
Wow.
I know it's crazy and heady, but I thought it was
heady. I like heady though. I think like you can't make fake brands without getting heady. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like life events and then there's qualities. I'd say the one thing I wouldn't want to change about myself is being curious. That has led me to so much, and even just thinking about the kinds of risks that you have to take when you want to be curious. And it's something I find that I really value in others. When I find it, it feels really special. So I think in 999, that was the number, and that many lives, I would hope that stays consistent. Also, I think having good people. I really do think like we as designers sometimes we are islands, or we have to be like. I have a friend who is always like, oh, in order to be a creative, you have to be like the most stubborn, person in the world, or what, all these different things, or like you're kind of self-obsessed or whatever it is, but you really need people. It's vulnerable, like that first day at art school when you pin your work on the wall and it's like you up there. So I would hope community or having like a good value for the people around me, family, friends would be there too.
I feel like I'm spending the majority of my adult life trying to get out of this identity of being like a lone wolf and trying to embrace community, embrace help, which I know that it should sound easy, but it's a harder challenge than it appears.
Yeah. I think that's hard. I would hope that's hard for everyone, or maybe we're weird. I don't know. But asking for help has definitely been more of a learning than it has been like a given for me. I wouldn't say it was like an innate ability at all.
Maybe that's like an East Coast thing.
Maybe. I'm not sure. We'll find out. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I have to say my life is better and richer for it every time. It's an easy lesson to learn. It's just a little vulnerable. It's like a little scary, and
yeah, getting vulnerable is definitely challenging, but it's always rewarding to get outside of your comfort zone and to do something that's hard. I think that's why adversity makes us stronger and helps us to kind of I guess to keep it in the realm of a little nerdy, it helps us to level up, if you will.
I think when things get too easy, I get bored.
Mm-hmm.
Like you need friction. You need that thing that's like, maybe you identify as this, but like I think my workload is the best when I have just like one extra thing I can't quite handle. Like just like a little bit of like tension there to keep me going. And it's like just that little bit of a challenge.
That's kind of my life right now with maybe one too many projects plus a podcast.
Yep. That'll do it.
What is your drink of choice? And it doesn't have to be alcohol.
I mean, I make tea a lot. I'm definitely.
Oh yeah.
I have like I drink coffee in the morning, but I recently discovered that I needed like a nighttime routine, that I wasn't doing that well. And I think probably everyone can benefit from that if they don't have it, because of the fact that we all have computers in our pockets these days.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past year, I've been working to like establish a nighttime routine for myself, and that's been a method, and it's fun. Like I think there's something to appreciate in all that. And I sometimes when I travel use tea as like a form of tourism and like
Nice.
bring it back. So I feel like my cupboard is a little bit of a scrapbook. It's corny, but it's true.
Do you have a go-to tea in that case?
I mean, at nighttime, chamomile tea is like a hug, but I love pu'er tea. It's like a fermented Chinese black tea. And it's one of the few black teas that I really enjoy that I don't want to add anything to. Like so often, I think you might have grown up with like milk or honey or lemon or whatever it is that you did. And that one I think is just like kind of perfect the way it is.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Love it. That's great. We can round it out with food and drink, but
yeah.
What would your metaphorical death row meal be?
Oh my goodness. Well, so I have a sweet tooth. My friends didn't believe me. We all got a studio back when I was independent. And I had said to them, I was like, oh, I have a sweet tooth. And, you know, it was 4 freelance people. We all got a space in Chinatown in the Lower East Side. And like 3 weeks in, my friend turned to me and they're like, well, so you really do eat like a pack of M&Ms every other day. And I was like, I told you that I'm like a person that likes that stuff. So as much as I want to say it would be like a Middle Eastern mezza spread, I actually think it would be like an ice cream sundae. So I'm going to be like a little kid about it. I actually put tahini on ice cream sometimes. Try it. It's really good.
That sounds so good. I mean, it's like the peanut butter of the Middle East, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, vanilla ice cream with tahini on it is really yum. I highly suggest trying that.
As we're winding down to a close, is there any last words or message that you would want to get out to the audience?
I mean, honestly, thanks for listening to this. I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, you made it through the 2 hours. You're a trooper.
Yeah, I think if you made it this far, I answer every email that Practice gets. So if you want to talk about any of this, shoot me a message. I'm like, part of what's so wonderful about this is just talking to like-minded people, but I think we learn so much from each other. And yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been a blast, and thank you for taking the time. I've learned a ton. I know that I need to balance out my life a little bit more. Maybe I need to plan a sabbatical. There's
no right or wrong way to do it. I think go where the wind goes and just follow that feeling. I don't know. That's maybe a little spiritual of me, but I believe in it. It's brought good things to my life.
Well, thank you again, Michelle. And to the audience out there, remember that we are all legendary and have an amazing story of our own. So on the journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind. And let's make the world a better and more creative place.